you for coming out on what is truly the loveliest day of the summer for this wonderful program. We're very grateful to have you all here. I want to spend a couple of seconds just shouting out a few thanks to Guildhall, its wonderful board and staff, especially Mickey Strauss, the chairman, Ruth Appelhoff, the executive director, and Tracy Marshall, who puts together the production of these wonderful weekend programs. I'm Ellen Chesler. I'm a senior fellow at the Roosevelt Institute, the partner organization in this enterprise. And we're now having our third summer of programming. I guess we're becoming an East Hampton institution. I want to thank our underwriters, our lead sponsors, the Tarr family and the Chubb Group and its local agent, Dayton Ritz Osborne, and the many of you and others who are not here on this gorgeous day who have been faithful underwriters and sponsors or fellows of the program for 3 years. I want to thank specifically, who I gather is in the audience, Donald Mullen of Goldman Sachs, who helped us secure our wonderful speaker, Dina Powell, and my good friend, Abby Disney, who made the extraordinary movie, if you haven't seen it, Pray the Devil Back to Hell, about Leymah Gbowee and the situation in Liberia, which you're going to hear about, and who helped introduce me to Leymah and bring her here today. Just 2 or 3 words about the Roosevelt Institute. We're the longtime partner of the Roosevelt Library and Presidential Museum in Hyde Park. The mission over the last many years has been to historicize the Roosevelt legacy with fabulous exhibitions up there. We have a new extraordinary park opening up on Roosevelt Island, the president of which and a member of our board is here today, Sally Menard, and we hope you'll all come out there to see this exquisite monument to the Roosevelts, which will open October 18th, and is the only work in New York ever of the great architect Louis Kahn. It's been 40 years in development since the early 70s and is really exquisite. Some of you who live on the east side may already not know what you're looking down at. It's at the very southern tip of Roosevelt Island. In recent years, the Roosevelt Institute has decided to create a living legacy to the Roosevelts and sponsors of 4 Freedom Centers, of which I'm fortunate to be a senior fellow, that is creating a robust conversation across this country about the Roosevelt legacy, specifically in economics, creating a new deal for the 21st century. We also have an extraordinary campus network on 200 campuses around the country. And we are now expanding our reach to talk a little bit about the global legacy of the Roosevelts, the United Nations, and specifically to begin its human rights legacy. And so today, our program helps launch a program called Women Rising at the Roosevelt Institute, which is about the very conversation you are going to be fortunate to hear, the ways in which investments in women as agents of democracy and of the formalizing of women's work is bringing and securing peace and prosperity in so many countries in the world. It's my pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce my dear friend Kati Marton, a distinguished and best-selling author, but also a longtime human rights activist who is going to in turn introduce the panel. Kati, as you know, or many of you know, his most recent book is an extraordinary memoir of growing up in Hungary after World War II and the experience of her parents, enemies of the people. It's a book you can't put down. Her new book, about to come out in 2 weeks, is the story of her marriage and the loss of Ambassador Richard Holbrooke. And I just read one of the preview reviews, and I gather it's another must-read that you won't be able to put down, so I hope you'll all go out and buy it. Unfortunately, I think it's not in the lobby because the publication date is 2 weeks hence, but I know you're going to all enjoy reading it. It is really a special occasion for me to have this conversation here because Eleanor Roosevelt really is the founder of the human rights movement globally, went to the United Nations as America's representative to the Human Rights Commission, wrote the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and in that conversation made specific reference to the rights of women and the need to secure the rights of women long before there was really the robust conversation, even in the United States, that we now have about women's rights. It was Eleanor Roosevelt who understood that human rights must begin in small places close to home. Without meaning there, they have no meaning anywhere. She encouraged people all over the world to engage in a conversation about advancing the rights of women long before it was fashionable. And we're going to hear about how that conversation is going and how it is, I believe, changing the world in this wonderful program this morning. So Kati and Leymah and Dina, please come to the stage.
Thank you all for coming out and choosing us over the beach and the tennis court. I'm not sure I would have made the same choice, but it's wonderful to see so many of you. And we promise, Lena and Dina and I, that we will make it worth your while. So as Ellen said, we have two extraordinary women who are walking the walk, not just talking the talk, of women rising. Our subject today is women ascendant, women rising in peacemaking and in prosperity. I would like us to have more than a kind of a back-patting conversation here. I'd like to explore whether that is indeed the case. Are women rising in a meaningful way? Certainly these two women are. But when the average American female worker is still making 18% less than her male counterpart, we still have a ways to go. And I think the fact that a recent cover story in Atlantic Monthly asking, "Can women have it all?" written by one of the highest powered women in the Obama administration, Anne Marie Slaughter, who concludes that no, women cannot have it all. She ended up returning to tend the home fires, leaving an extremely important position. So I'd like us to engage in that. But I'd like to start with Leymah, who is one of those transformative figures in our world. It isn't an exaggeration to say that without firing a shot, she brought about dramatic change in her war-torn country of Liberia, which was under the rule of one of the most ruthless warlords in Africa, and that's saying something. Charles Taylor, recently condemned to a long prison sentence in The Hague, and much of that is your doing. And the fact... And of course, we're here to find out how exactly you did that and how it is that as a result of your organizing, grassroots organizing of the women of Liberia, you have now brought the first woman head of state in Africa, Ellen Sirleaf Johnson, with whom you share the Nobel Peace Prize this year. So we're extraordinarily pleased for you and proud to have you with us. So I'm frankly in awe of you. I stayed up all night reading this, Mighty Be Our Powers, which when you finish reading Paris, A Love Story, my new book, I recommend. But you got that order. On a serious note, your own trajectory really runs parallel to Liberia's. That is to say that you did not have a great start in life.
No.
And yet you pretty much bottomed out and hit a wall, and then you found the strength not only to transform yourself, but to bring the women of Liberia with you. Where did you find the strength, and where did you find the courage to face these men, armed and absolutely dangerous? Where did you find that strength and that courage?
Thank you. And first, let me say thank you to everyone here for making this a success, my being here. This is a real small group compared to just coming back from New Orleans and interacting with 33,309 young people in the Superdome from all over the U.S. So this is really
A good conversation.
A good conversation as compared to 16, 18 years olds. But
we hope.
You know, when the war started, though my parents weren't rich, we were comfortable in the sense that we were protected. In my book, we talk about the community I grew up in being a peri-urban, urban with rural flavor, mixture of ethnic groups and different things, and we really practice our culture. So being sheltered all my life, and then all of a sudden one day everything collapsed. And I carried a lot of anger. I was really very angry for many years, angry at God, angry at those who started the war, angry for many different reasons. And when I started having my children, the anger wasn't going away, the pain wasn't going away. And one of the things I say to young people when I'm working with them, what can you say Charles Taylor, Hitler, Mandela, Dr. King have in common? And they look at me like, nothing, because you can't be comparing Hitler, Charles Taylor with Mandela and Martin Luther King. I say they do have one trait in common, and that trait is anger. They were all very angry at a particular situation. The difference between those group of people is the way they decided to deal with their anger. And I would say that was what I did as a person, really thinking through. I've seen guns from 17 to 31. It hasn't done anything for this community. And if I decide to be a fighter, I may just die a valiant. Let's try something else. And there's nothing like grabbing a bunch of angry African women and saying, let's do something for peace. And that was exactly what we did, because we all shared similar pains. The group of women that came together, there was not a single one of us that hadn't seen a child go to bed hungry. Some of us had been raped. Some of us had been beaten, abused. We all had our lives turned upside down. So we just decided, let's use our pain and our broken bodies, just put it out there to confront these cowards that are really unleashing all this terror on us. That was basically what we did. And most times people say that was an act of being a hero. I would say that was an act of being fed up and an act of survival.
One of the most appalling things that Charles Taylor did, of course, was to rip your children from you and to turn them into what he called small soldiers. And you spend a great deal of time talking about how important it is not to shun these child soldiers. By the way, I spent a year at the United Nations working on this issue. It's one of the trickiest of all issues because these children are robbed of their childhood and turned into cold-blooded killers. How do you bring them back? That is such an important part of your mission, because these are your children.
Well, it's a catch-22 situation, like you said, because these are young people who have killed their mothers, raped their aunties, and done all of the difficult things. I remember when I started working with them, the first day I went to meet with them, they abused me for 1 hour. I mean, really abused me. And the next day, they abused me, I'll say, for 59 minutes, and the following day, 58. And when they realized that I wasn't going away, the abuses stopped. But what I realized was that as they would do all of these macho things, in 30 minutes, there will be a switch. And you will see that 18-year-old boy become the 8-year-old that he was when he was giving the drugs and giving the guns. Yes. And he is that child. He's trapped in the body of that 8-year-old, even though he has become a man and a killing machine. And when I started working with them, I thought to myself, I can't deal with these children or these young men at 18. We have to go back to being 8 years old. And that's how I dealt with them.
Yes.
You know, really what you do with your 8-year-old child, reassuring them and just being there for them. That transformation for me came when one of them looked for me for a week and he couldn't find me, frantically looking for me because he had something to say. And when he finally found me, he said, I looked for you and looked for you. I couldn't find you, so I've been high for over a week, because that's the only way he could cope. Yes. So he was just high, struck out on drugs. And when we sat down to talk, it was like reassuring my 8-year-old. And this is a 16-year-old boy. But just really just reaching out at that level, reaching out at that compassionate level. And when you say that in a society that's been wounded like Liberia, people think you're crazy. How can you be compassionate to people who killed? And then you ask yourself, think about think about your 8-year-old.
Yes.
Giving drugs, giving guns, and said, go out there and do whatever. Well,
let's bring Dina into the conversation, because Dina's doing astonishing things as head of Goldman Sachs's foundation to nurture and foster women and bring them into leadership roles through her 10,000 Women project. How exactly are you doing that? And I see, of course, an intersection between what the two of you do, because it is by now a truism that societies that do not empower their women cannot progress beyond a certain limited ceiling. And so you two are really comrades in arms. So how does...
That's an honor for me, for sure.
Dina, how does your 10,000 Women...
Sure. Well, thank you, first of all, Kati, and it's such an honor to be with two extraordinary female leaders, Kati and Leymah. When Leymah spoke at Goldman Sachs last year, literally there were people hanging outside of the auditorium trying to get in. More than 1,000 people wanted to come hear her speak, and the work that she has done is so humbling. It's one of the reasons I wanted my 2 daughters to come today. Kate and Ava are here, along with Leymah's children, who I know are here. It was an honor backstage to introduce them all, but I really can't think of a greater role model for my own daughters to see the work that you have done to change a country, but change the world. You are awfully kind to mention 10,000 Women. I want to thank Ellen and Don Mullen, my colleague at Goldman Sachs, who's here today. You know, one of the greatest things about this program is how invested everyone at Goldman Sachs is, from our CEO, Lloyd Blankfein, to so many of my colleagues all around the world. We started this effort more than 4 years ago to literally reach 10,000 women around the world with business and management education, mentors and networking, and links to capital. It emerged because at Goldman Sachs we had 2 pieces of research that actually showed that if you empower women economically, GDP grows, both in developed and developing economies. And what is so interesting about the work that Leymah does and the work that we are trying to do is that if you really want more peaceful and prosperous solutions, the very best investment is investing in women, especially female entrepreneurs who grow their businesses, who create jobs. We're now working in 22 countries. 6,000 women have graduated, including in Monrovia, where Leymah knows a number of the female entrepreneurs there, who, when we started, there really was no economic program for women at all, and now they are literally growing their businesses. At Goldman, we measure everything. That might not surprise you. And the International Center for Research on Women just did the first independent analysis of the program and found that 80% of the graduates are increasing revenues, 60% are creating new jobs. But a very important but not surprising piece of data is that 9 out of 10 are mentoring at least one other woman. Now, Kati said to me, don't do too many numbers. I'm getting warped at Goldman Sachs. But I had to set that stage because I think it's important that we are so focused on results. But the real power are the stories of the women themselves. One of the women that we work with in Liberia had a very, very difficult time throughout the war, and it was really remarkable. She could barely read and write, but she got into the program. She actually now has a gas company where she literally is providing corn oil and has now hired 25 women. So the stories are so powerful, and I know that you wanted me to share a couple specific ones.
Well, you know, one of the things I love about your narrative is that you turn these stories, women's stories, into a source of strength at the highest reaches of policymaking. I love your crown and thorn. It's kind of therapy, group therapy. Explain how that works, because I frankly think we could use some of it, all of us. So how does Crown and Thorn, how was that such, how did that tap the women's strength, this thing that you developed called Crown and Thorn?
One of the things we do when we bring women back together to do the work that they do, I was talking to my daughters last night, trying to help, getting them to help me think through, because I think sometimes they think that my work is easy. I get to travel and meet fantastic
That's their
people.
job as your children.
Well, sometimes you need to tell them that I have to put a lot of thinking into what I say. It's not just going up there and just... So we were sitting and having a chat, but the way we do our thing with the women when we start working is to bring them into a space. And the first thing we recognize as African women is that you just exist as a girl. No one has ever taught you to, or has ever helped you reaffirm or affirm what womanhood is. You know? So we put them, when we go into the room, the first session we do is something called being a woman. And the first time you work with these women, when you say, what is being a woman? There is nothing about themselves. It's a mother, a wife, a caregiver. So everything is outside of themselves. And then you ask them, as a woman, identify what are your crowns. And they will go on to say children, husband, nothing about themselves. And then you say, what are your thorns? The idea of this session is to really get them to come to realize that around all of these things, yourself is important. You know, so we realize that as women talk about their crowns, the crowns are often associated with their thorns. When you go home today, sit down and think about your life and what are those things that you value? What are those things that are the crowns in your life? And when you start to think about the things that are the thorns in your life, you realize that they're closely connected. But as we do this and help them to really come to understand themselves, one of the other things we do in the room, which I think is fun, and we did in Congo, is draw yourself. And really just tell us, what is that feature of your body that you like? And the first thing you get, what? You know, because none of these women, again, we dress up and we get in the street and people admire our things, but at home, what I find with most of the women is that you never get your kids, because again, it's not part of the culture to say, you look good, mommy, or your husband to say, you're very pretty. And to even look in the mirror, spend some time looking at yourself and saying, wow, God, you did a good job with me. You know, many of them don't. So by the time we get to that place, now we do something also called a catwalk. So these women walk in the middle of other women and describe themselves positively. And at the end of that one day, it's the ones that were very quiet, they are always chatty, because they've really come to that place where they find themselves. And just going back last night, talking to these young people, my daughters, about women rising, the theme for today, and the implication for global peace and security, the one thing that struck me was that, is it that we are rising now, or is it that there is an awareness being created that we are contributing? And I come back to Dina's program, the 10,000 women. In Liberia, all my life, I saw my grandmother, my auntie, my own mother work. But like our womanhood, no one attributed that work to any real contribution.
Yes.
So it's not like you did anything or you've done anything. It's like, yes, this is what you, even when the husbands are sitting and drinking the palm wine, you are paying the school fees. No one is saying, so at the end of high school, it's the fathers that get up to speak. So the roles of these women minimized. What has happened, or what is happening globally, is this new awareness that you're actually contributing. And programs like the 10,000 women is really putting it into perspective for a lot of these women, where they're saying, you know, I never really counted my pennies.
Yes.
But it's amounting to thousands. I need to shut up.
No, you
No.
don't. I wish we had all day to hear you. Now, Dina, this notion of women's work being respected and whether it's in the home or outside the home. This week we had the news of Yahoo hiring a 37-year-old woman to be its CEO, and of course the big news about that was that she also the same day announced that she was pregnant. You know, there's still this kind of built-in friction between those two pieces of ourselves, the mother and the provider. We want to be both, but we're still torn, right? In you know, one part is generally getting short shrift. How does, and you write about this very powerfully, that you had to give up being a mother for quite a while to in order to find the leader in you, and how painful that was. What I love about your book, among other things, Leymah, is how human you are. We in our country tend to like our icons to be perfect, and you embrace your
My flaws.
Your flaws, which are so real. Dina, does the 10,000 women attempt to deal with that built-in conflict for most of us still?
Well, I will maybe describe it by telling you a story
Yes.
about our program in Kabul, Afghanistan. It's one of my favorite stories of the 10,000 Women program, and I should say that I had the privilege of working with Ambassador Holbrooke on this initiative where we work at the American University in Afghanistan, and he was so dedicated to making sure that women were central to the peace process, because he understood just strategically, if they were, then peace had a much better shot than otherwise.
He learned all that from me, by the way.
Well, there's always a woman behind men like that. But what we learned in Afghanistan, which you can imagine is one of the most challenging places to economically empower women, again, for many years when the Taliban actually restricted girls from going to school. And certainly there were no universities that accepted women. We work there now at the American University in Afghanistan. We've worked with 300 entrepreneurs. But one story always just struck a chord with us. There's a woman that we work with, Rangina Hamidi, who owns a company called Kandahar Treasures. She still goes to the most conservative provinces throughout the country, and women who still cannot leave their homes in many of the Taliban-controlled areas give her handicraft, beautiful scarves, jewelry, rugs that they've made. Rangina sells them and returns the proceeds to these women. And a couple of years ago, when she first started working with us, she told us a story about a woman in Bamyan, which is really considered the most difficult province in Afghanistan still. She returned some money one day to a woman living there who had literally never left her home. And the woman grabbed her hand and said, "Rangina, I have to tell you a story. My husband never respected me. My husband barely ever even looked me in the eye. But ever since I started working with you and making just a little bit of income, he suddenly talks to me. He even asks my opinion on things now." And just the other day, in a dismissive way, he did say, "You know, I think all of these girls' schools that are propping up are terrible. But since we do have 3 young daughters, I suppose I should ask your opinion on whether or not we should put them in school." And when Rangina told us the story, we said, "Oh, did she say, yes, yes, please send my daughters to school?" And she said, "No, she was much smarter than you would be, Dina." She said to him, "Well, I never bore you a son. And so because of that, you're going to have to care for these 3 girls. You're going to have to provide them a dowry. But if they go to school, they will learn a skill. And like me, they will make money and take care of you in your old age." And the husband looked at her for a moment and then said, "You are right. We will force them to go to school." And sure enough, all these years we've checked on it, those 3 little girls are still in school. And this woman, who will never read or write and who will never leave her home, used her moment of power so wisely. And she got that moment of power by being economically independent.
Yes.
And that is, I think, where this intersection of investing in women if you care about global peace, national security policy, or in a global recession, if you care about economic growth, women are the single best investment.
Leymah, you of course, emphasize throughout your book that women are the experts in peace building. Explain that.
Well, I gave this analogy. Two brothers live in a compound, and they start a fight. Their wives and their daughters are in the compound. But before the fight, these women have observed the build-up to the fight and the tension. They know everything. And there is this big fight that destroys everything in that compound, including wounding these women. And some men outside of the compound comes to make peace and decide the women and the daughters should sit outside. Think about it for a moment. Who knows the beginning of that crisis? Who knows those men better than anyone to say, if you tackle peace from this or his perspective this way,
Yes.
you're going to get to peace. If you tackle this issue from this perspective this way, you're going to get to that. No one but those women, because they've been there.
Yeah.
Take it to the national level. I'll give you a typical example. When we started disarmament in the communities, boys live like here. And the disarmament was like probably the other side of East Hampton. And you have mothers coming to us from this side of the block where no one knew these boys fought because they left from their community and committed atrocities across the river and say, my son was a fighter. And we have guns here. And we want you to help us take the guns from them. We go to do this kind of disarmament with these boys. And we're standing there. And because, again, in a lot of our communities, it is the mothers who are the ones these boys really would pay respect to, because fathers are most often not around. And if they are around, they have no care for these boys. These women understand the frustration of their sons. They understand why they want to get involved. And then you go to say, I'm building peace or I'm making peace, and I'm taking out the key, most information, or the person who has all of the information out of the thing. That's the first thing. The second part of it is that when we start building peace as women, it's not about our selfish interest. I'll give you another story.
It's about our families.
We went to disarm the boys. And one of the women, she was there, and she was in charge of feeding combatants who couldn't move. And she's using her hand to feed him. He looked up and saw her face and said, old mama, mother, sit me up. She sat him up. And he asked her, where is your daughter? And she said, my daughter died. He said, I know. And she said, how did you know? He said, because I killed her.
Oh my God.
So when she came back to the office, and then I asked her, Ma Sata, did you stop feeding him? She said, well, was I supposed to? Isn't that what peace is about? I fed him. I fed him because I knew I had a community of women that I would come back to cry. And she came into my office and sat down and wailed. When it comes to peacemaking and peace building, we are the greatest. We are the ones who suffer the brunt. We are the ones who feel the pinch. Because when your husband is a fighter and he goes out there and loses his life, you have the burden of children to bear. You are the mother who loses a son or a daughter, or you have to nurse that rape without saying a single word to anyone. So when it comes to peace building, you have to put all of those things behind you and say, I'm moving ahead. Because again, peace in your community means peace in your life.
Human values rather than political. And you don't have a particularly high opinion of the UN.
Well, you know, my mother told me the old people, they will say the meaning of madness is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. That's the UN.
Well, The example of Liberia and your transformative role there, can that work elsewhere? You're now working from Ghana, although you've moved back to Monrovia. But are you attempting to transfer the
one of the
example
mistakes
of Liberia?
that the UN makes, and that's why I'm critical of them, is that they have this one-size-fits-all for their peace-building initiative. And I think every conflict is unique. Every conflict has different perspective. And when it comes to building peace in different countries, people have to decide for themselves that this is the way it's going to go. What we can offer, what I do in communities is sit with women and try to listen to them. 2 years ago, we were in Congo, and sitting with those women in Congo, I left that room saying to Abby Disney and the others who went with me.
Well, let me just say that Abby Disney produced this fantastic documentary called Pray the Devil Back to Hell. And if you haven't...
Ginny Rediker.
And Ginny is right here.
Okay. Thank you for a really, really great work. And I recommend it for all of you. Sorry.
I was saying to her that it's going to be difficult for us to see the women come together in Congo for now. Because what we see in the Congo is that the conflict hasn't come to the place where women see it as we are the great, we are the ones that threat, we are the ones that risks here. It's still about which political group and which ethnic group wins. In Liberia, we came to that place where it was to hell with our religion, to hell with our ethnic group. We are banding together based on one common thing, and that is our humanity as women. And so in different areas, until people can come to that place where they understand that wars are not fought because of the political ideologies, or peace can never be made because of the political ideologies, but if people put aside these ideologies and come together, then we will find peace.
I think it's also institutions coming together, you know, in countries. And I think this could be a tipping point moment for this whole issue. When you have the government seeing this as a national security priority, you have corporations like Goldman Sachs. 4 years ago when we announced this, it was the single largest investment in economically empowering women. Now, so many other corporations around the world are saying, we really need to be part of this if we care about growing jobs. And I think institutions like the UN, you know, you were saying earlier, have women always been rising, but nobody was noticing? I think people are noticing now. And I think a tipping point moment, though, as Leymah is saying, can go either way. And I think that's why it's been so critical to have leaders in the private sector, in the government, saying we all have to come together now.
Well, now we have a head of state, your head of state, a woman. Is she governing differently than a man would?
I think she's doing her best. Liberia is a very complicated place, a very complicated place. And one of the things that President Sirleaf, just by her elections, have done is to shatter that glass ceiling that Hillary Clinton just managed to crack in the U.S. I like to say that.
Came close.
Lots of cracks.
But it shattered it because in communities where girls had never really thought about doing something, there is now this real movement of young women thinking, I want to do this and I want to do that. Another person who has just become head of state in Africa that I would cite is Joyce Banda of Malawi. Joyce had just taken over as president since the vice president died. And not that we're part of the same feminist forum in Africa and the African Women's Leaders Network on Reproductive Rights and Family Planning, but Joyce is outright. You know, she's an activist turned president. So you get those kinds of things from her. The first thing she said, I don't think I'm going to be coming to the AU summit if I have to sit at the table with the likes of Bashir. I don't like him. I don't want to engage. She was not at the AU summit. Malawi had a thing about gay law and that would punish them. By the time she became president, she overturned it. Even though she's up for elections in 2 years, to hell with it. I'm living and standing by my conviction. And if it's going to cost me the presidency, so be it.
Yeah.
And those are the kinds of things that we get.
How did I'm just curious. How did you personally feel watching Charles Taylor sitting in the dock and be sentenced by the highest court in the world?
You know, there's something about people like Taylor. They tend to hold the day of Taylor's sentencing. I couldn't get dressed. So I came from taking my bath and I put on the first piece of clothing and I'm holding this piece and sitting in front of the television. And as they continue to read and read and read, the only thought that kept going through my mind, oh, see how hard the mighty has fallen. Because he's just sitting there and sitting there.
They don't look so big when they're in the dock.
Then we step outside, and this is something that many people haven't heard. But when the sentencing was going on, when the final verdict was coming down, the sun had a rainbow around it. And everyone was amazed. The BBC had set up a live crew, and the reporter was screaming, "This is the first time in my life I've seen something like this." And people were calling and saying it means traditionally a big chief has fallen. And I said, no, God is just telling us it's all right. His conviction is not going to bring us to war anymore. But it was a mixed feeling for me because, again, as an activist, I'm never satisfied until justice is balanced. Taylor is going to prison. What's going to happen to those amputees in Sierra Leone? That was my question. I'm glad to see, because what Taylor's conviction has done for Africa is to show Mugabe, Bashir, all of those who mess around with their people, that your day in court is due. So it's either you die now, or when you live, you will face justice. That's what Taylor's conviction has done to the world. But the other thing we need to do is to start thinking, whilst we put millions of dollars into prosecuting these people, the people who suffer the most at their hands will never know true justice until there's some kind of reparation to make their lives better.
Dina, I know that our friends in the audience have questions for us, so we'll go to that. But first, I'd like to return to where I started, which is that it is not yet a perfect ascendancy for women, you know, the great conversation that was sparked by the Atlantic cover story about women having it all, I think brought back a subject which I frankly thought we'd already had, but obviously it's still relevant, and women are still having to make choices. Do you feel that in your experience that there is a compromise to be made? In other words, that we can't have it all?
Well, I'll answer it a couple of ways. I mean, first, from my perspective of working with so many women around the world, you know, one of the most interesting things about this whole issue is how, in our country, for instance, bipartisan it is. You know, Secretary Clinton's leadership has been extraordinary. Secretary Rice's leadership was very similar in terms of making this central.
You worked for Secretary Rice.
I had the privilege of working for her and traveling throughout the Middle East and many countries after 9/11, and it was clear when she sat at those tables, just like Secretary Clinton does now, and said, I won't even discuss any of the national security issues you care about until you tell me what you're doing for women and girls in your country. I mean, that is so powerful, and to use that power in that role is extraordinary. But I remember in many ways this whole dialogue began when Secretary Clinton, so many years ago, now more than 17 years ago, went to China and made that declarative statement that women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And it set off such a firestorm, you may remember. And all these years later, not only did that statement resonate and create enormous change, but last year, when she went to the APEC summit, when all the Asian countries gathered again, she said, I know what I said so many years ago, and now I have something new to say, which is women are central. Forget just about the right thing to do or how we should help women around the world. But if we want to have an impact in this global recession, they have to be central to the economy. So that is a very, I think the ball is moving, and I think that is so different now, that if you, this is not the right thing to do, this is the smart thing to do.
Yes.
As Bob Zellick always says, it's smart economics to invest in women.
And on a more human, personal level, can anybody have it all?
I'm not sure how to define all. You know what I think that women do a little better than, I'll say one other thing though, mentioning Zellick. You know what's interesting about the debate now is how many men are saying this is the right thing to do, whether it's...
How do you feel on this issue? You certainly didn't have it all at once.
I think we can have it all. And that's my optimistic mind. I definitely think we can have it all. And I think we are having it all. The problems we have now is just another side, some other part of the world recognizing that having it all doesn't, for women, doesn't mean that we're going to hoard it. It means that everyone else's life is going to be better.
Yes, it isn't about personal
No,
ambition
it's not about it. And when you have like these women leaders in country like President Sirleaf, President Banda, Hillary Clinton, and all of these people, when people start saying we've given it to them, what else do they want? You want to say to them as, you've given it to us. Is it just us that are benefiting from it? Don't you see changes, you know, in more meaningful ways in the lives of girls, in the lives of boys, in the lives of people in general, things that are important. It's not just about politics.
I want to add to that, because you're sort of saying our personal view. You know what I think is different is that I don't think it's for one woman to define. I think that what women do is give each other grace to define it for themselves. So I think it's extremely hard to have that conversation and say one path is correct or one isn't.
But I don't think men have it all either. Those men who spend their lives in the office are missing out a great deal too.
But Kati, you want to also ask yourself, when you talk about having it all, what are you talking about? Because if you ask me, I'll tell you I have it all. And then you say, but you live in Africa, you have all of the problems in Africa, in the world. But then I say, yes, at least I have a space where I'm able to stand up and address some of those problems, but also have this space where I'm able to carry some of the women along. So having it all, like Dina says, defining, you know, also I'm saying defining what is all. All to one person could mean a company, a group of people. Having it all could mean having economic security in some countries, peace and security in other countries, but it's just what is having it all. And I'm saying everyone, including men, can have it all. It's just an understanding that we're all unique, we all have unique skills, and just allow us to contribute those skills, because my theory is the world is operating on 50% of its brains. Until women come into the spaces that they are lacking, we will continue to see the problems that we have.
On that note, we'd love to hear your questions, if you have questions.
I have a daughter who's a journalist with Reuters, and she just went and spent a week in Dagestan to cover the problem of the Muslimization of the country. And because she's young, she was instantly invited to 2 weddings, and she started talking to all of the women there, and the women were traditionally kidnapped by husbands until they could do things, and now they're being turned into multiple wives because of the Muslim problem there. And she said, you know, Mother, I've talked to all of these women, and I don't think any solution will come unless some international organization comes in and organizes them. So I just want to know how you get in touch to go into a country like Dagestan to do that kind of thing.
Let me just say one thing, and I want to really debunk the myth of the superwoman thing. There's no superwoman in this field of organizing. If you even try to think that you're a superwoman, you've missed the mark. The thing about organizing is an internal thing, and I made mention about my Congo experience. In Liberia, since the end of the war, you go to different communities, and the challenges are enormous. I spent last 2 weeks with 30 women activists from 30 different communities with some of the worst challenges: rape, teenage pregnancy. And these women, when I got into the room, the first question was, how did you put us together? And how is it now that we can't get the women together to act on these things? And I told them, it's so sad that you all did not learn anything. And they started laughing, but it was really serious. The one question I asked them, when you're inviting women to a gathering, what are you inviting them for? And they said, oh, we're just inviting them. I said, let me tell you something. You have to find something that every woman sees as a problem in the community to mobilize them around that issue. Maybe your daughter saw the kidnapping of those women in that part of the world as a problem. Until those women for themselves can see it as a problem, even if you have 10 conferences in the US and carry 2,000 more conferences to them, they will look at you like you're mad.
So it has to come
It
from
has
the
to
ground.
be internally generated. If I come into this community and start talking about, oh, we need to do this, we need to do that, until the community by itself see that particular issue as a problem, I will be wasting my time. So the only way I would go into any space if I'm invited by those women to say, we need you. Come, let's sit together and talk about issues of peace or talk about issues of mobilizing like the women of Sierra Leone are doing now. We need you to come because we see the elections are going this way. We want to see how we can all hang head. And I keep saying to them, we, Liberian women, would come to a space to work if you are leading the way. We are not going to come with that mentality that we know it all. What kills me, and every time I get so upset, when a group of people leave from either the US or London or somewhere and say, we've come to a country to teach these women. Are you kidding me? Do you know my culture? You can't teach me. What you can do is to come into a space and let's share experiences. And I can pick from you and you can pick from me. And again, together, with our common ideas, we can make the world a better place.
Has the...
Kati, can I say
yes.
one thing on that? I could not agree more with you that that is the most important thing. The fact that so many well-intentioned institutions, government, the private sector go in and think they're going to teach something or to help. It's totally disrespectful. I think our guiding principle in 10,000 Women is how we can go and learn from these extraordinary women and use local partners, local institutions to do something together in partnership. It's the reason we're working in Pakistan now because there are so few female entrepreneurs there and so many women came forward during Secretary Clinton's visit there and actually requested that the program go there. And we have a different model there. We actually have to bring the women to the United States that we work with. But it is amazing, as I know your husband used to see, that you can do it the wrong way so easily without having that level of respect.
Leymah, has the Nobel Peace Prize empowered you? Has it made you more of an international mediator, organizer? Are your services more greatly in demand? And are you willing to engage in...
Kati, you have to ask her children that question. They'd give a more honest answer.
Well, these children, they don't even see me as a Nobel laureate. Honestly, I wish they could give me a little bit more respect. You know,
I know the feeling.
I told I went to France to visit my daughter, my sister and my niece said, you have to come to my school. And I said, okay, so my sister lives in Toulon, south of France. And we're arguing about the way we would dress. And I said, but it's Salman's school. Salman is a 10th grader, and there's nothing about going to her classroom. So let's just put on jeans and T-shirt, because again, I'm still a local girl. And then she said, I think we should try and put on something. I said, oh, Josephine, you worry too much. Anyway, finally she won because she can nag. And I dress up well, and we got to this.
You look great today.
Beautiful.
Thank you. We got to the school, and there was cameras. And then I said to her, why is the press here? And then as I was saying the story, and my daughter said, so why were they there? And my sister said, your mother is a Nobel laureate. She said, oh, I forgot that part. So just to show you how much respect they have for me. But when it comes to the prize, I was just saying to Cora and colleagues when we were at breakfast that there's one thing about this prize that I've come to learn very early on. People, when you have the prize, you're like an ornament. So people want you to come to their events to brighten it. So, you know, we were able to bring, you know, like that very lovely ornament on the Christmas tree, bam. And you're doing nothing but to brighten it.
That's not why we asked.
I've resisted that. I will not go to any space where I know that I'm not going to make any impact and people are not interested in what I have to say. That's clear cut. Immediately after the prize, we identify issues that I've worked on that are dear to my heart and that I will continue to work on, and those are the issues that you get me to continue working on. So there is this, now I work still on peace and security for women, reproductive health and rights is a serious issue that I think we need to continue to talk about, and girls' leadership. Those three things you get me to go anywhere to talk about. So you get all kinds of demands to go to different places, but I'm very selective about the places that I go to. That's one. Two, you have all of these big platforms globally that they will invite you to be a member of. Can you come and be on the board of this? Can you be on the... we said no many times. But I've just, along with the president of Tanzania, gotten on the high-level panel on reproductive health and rights. Between now and 2015, that's a long time to be talking about family planning, but I think it's something that is very important. Absolutely. One of the things, Kati, that I say, and I say it to this group, and you can take it and use it as a quote, what the Nobel has done for me as a person is giving me, a local girl, a global platform to advance the issues of rights of women and girls.
Wonderful. I think we have... My name, perhaps, is not in lights the way I dreamed when I was in my 20s, that I would be the next Barbara Walters. But I do
Pretty
think...
darn close, Kati.
Hardly. I think we all make bargains with ourselves. So I really don't buy into the superwoman thing, because I think we all make compromises along the way. Dina?
Well, I'm so lucky, as I said, that Kate and Ava are here today, and as Kati said, there's nothing more precious to me in the world than those two little girls. And when along the way there were those tough days of needing to be two places at one time, somehow they would know that or something, because I remember when Kate met one of the graduates at Goldman that had come from Nigeria. Really Nigeria, one of the 10,000 women graduates, and it was a day after she had been at school, and she met her, and she said to me afterwards, wow, I can't believe that something you did could help her. And I remember thinking, on my tough days, I have to remember that we are all our daughter's first role model in life. And
I think our
they give
children's
us some grace.
After a while, they come around. I think Amber told me, my daughter Amber there is very quiet in an evil way. She has her opinion.
Yeah, she looks
very quiet. Abby says she'll be looking at you and she's laughing at you in her head because she has done her own full analysis of you as an individual. But she told me when she was growing up, Mama, I would never ever want to be a peace builder. My interpretation of that was I want to stay home for my children. I read somewhere, and my faith is very important to me, and what I do I see as something that I'm doing for God. It says, do what you can and God will help you do what you can't. I've held on to that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dina. You were wonderful. Leymah,
thank you.
Absolutely a pleasure. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us.